Alex Miller was a 24-year-old photography student living in New York. Known for his fascination with vintage cameras and analog photography, Alex used modern digital equipment for school projects, but always had a special place in his heart for antique cameras. For him, these cameras were magical tools that carried the stories of the past into the present. One Saturday morning, amidst the cold and foggy weather of the city, Alex went to the flea market in the Lower East Side to browse through the antique shops. In the narrow streets lined with antique stores, objects hundreds of years old carried the traces of forgotten lives. As usual, Alex carefully scanned the surroundings until he stopped in front of an old shop on the corner. This shop, named Old Memories, looked no different from the others from the outside, but the thought of what he might find inside excited him. As soon as Alex stepped into the shop, the smell of old leather books and worn wooden furniture hit his nose. Dusty chandeliers hanging from the ceiling flickered faintly in the dim light. Alex greeted the shopkeeper, an elderly man, and began to examine the shelves. Then, something caught his attention in one of the display cases in the far corner. It was a camera, older than all the other cameras, almost worn by time. The camera appeared to be from the 1920s, with its heavy metal casing and shiny glass lens standing out. It had a barely visible, partially erased name, W.L. Edwards. Alex had never heard this name before. However, the camera fascinated him. Everything around him seemed to blur. He was focused solely on this camera. The shopkeeper, an elderly man, approached Alex, noticing his interest. "You like that camera, huh?" he asked in a low voice. The wrinkles on the man's face reflected the weight of the years he had lived. "Yes," Alex replied. "What do you know about this camera?" The man carefully took the camera out of the display case and handed it to Alex. This camera once belonged to a famous photographer. Every photo taken with it seemed as if it was from another world. However, the owner suddenly disappeared one day. No one knows where he went. Alex's curiosity was piqued. Owning such a camera was a significant discovery for him. Moreover, it could be a unique piece for his photography project. "I want to buy it," he said, his eyes never leaving the camera. The old man seemed hesitant to sell the camera, but eventually nodded in agreement. "The price is a bit higher than the others, but it seems its value to you is more than just money." When Alex left the shop, he safely stowed the camera in his bag. As he headed home, he thought about the possibilities that this old and worn camera might bring him. However, what he didn't know was the dark secret lying in its past. The camera was not just for taking photographs. It was also made to trap souls. That night, Alex began to examine the camera more closely in his room. His first task was to find an old film and load it into the camera. As he prepared to use the camera, a wave of excitement washed over him. But this excitement would soon give way to a strange feeling. Each photograph he took would open doors to a dark world he was not ready to encounter. Alex had lost track of time while fiddling with the old camera. The camera was more complex and intriguing than he had initially thought. Eagerly, he set up the camera and loaded some film for a few test shots. He decided to spend the night working with the camera. His apartment was located a bit away from the hustle and bustle of New York, in a quieter neighborhood. In his small but cozy apartment on the 5th floor of a large building, Alex often worked late into the night. That night was no different. The only light in his room came from a small desk lamp on his table. The lamp's light danced across the metallic surface of the camera. After taking a few test photos with the camera, Alex decided to develop the film. The small darkroom, perfect for developing film, was filled with the equipment Alex had set up specifically for this purpose. He turned off the lights, switched on the red lamp, and carefully rolled the film. After preparing the chemicals, he began the development process. As the film slowly dissolved and images began to appear, A smile spread across Alex's face. However, as the images became clearer, his smile turned into astonishment and then anxiety. There was something he had not noticed before in the photos. In every frame, a dark shadow appeared in different corners and at different sizes. At first, he thought it might be a technical glitch. Perhaps the inside of the camera was dusty, or there was a smudge on the lens. However, as he examined the frames more closely, he realized that these shadows were not random. They resembled a human silhouette. It was as if someone was present in the photographs. Each frame left the impression that it was being watched. A strange unease began to settle over Alex as he tried to make sense of the situation. He looked at each photo repeatedly, noticing that the shadows appeared in different places each time. The silhouette sometimes appeared on the wall, sometimes in a corner, and sometimes almost directly in front of him. This situation began to disturb Alex greatly. He hung the photos on the wall, stepped back to examine them, and thought, were these just coincidences? Or was there something about the camera he didn't know? That night, despite going to bed, Alex couldn't sleep. As soon as he closed his eyes, the photos he had taken came to life in his mind, with shadows appearing one by one. This only unsettled him further. He managed to sleep for only a few hours in the early morning, but his sleep was restless and fragmented. The next day, when Alex woke up sleepless, his first task was to check the camera again. However, he found nothing unusual. The lens was clean, and the internal mechanism was working properly. Yet, a sense of fear had taken hold of him. When he reviewed the photos again, he realized that the shadows were not only in the first set of shots, but in all the subsequent ones. It was as if this shadow was following him, being with him at every moment. Alex decided that there had to be a deeper explanation for this. He needed to learn more about the camera. However, the truths he would uncover in doing so would pull him into a darkness he had never expected. The next morning, Alex set out to gather himself and find the source of the shadows in his photos. Though his eyes still burned from sleeplessness, his determination gave him strength. His first task was to learn more about the faintly marked name on the camera, W.L. Edwards. A brief online search revealed that Edwards was a well-known photographer from the 1920s. However, the information he uncovered only drew him deeper into a greater sense of curiosity and fear. W.L. Edwards was a prominent photographer in the early 1920s, known for his dark and grim photographs documenting New York's underworld. However, his career had ended abruptly, and he mysteriously disappeared. The last piece of information about Edwards mentioned that his name had come up in a murder investigation. The victim of the murder was his closest friend and business partner. Edwards vanished shortly after this event. Although there was no information about the camera's history, it was said that Edwards became quite obsessive and paranoid in his later years. Learning this information only intensified Alex's discomfort. It was as if Edwards's spirit was reappearing as shadows in the photographs. Though this thought deeply unsettled him, it also fueled his desire to uncover the truth. Throughout the day, Alex tried to gather more information about Edwards's past. He sifted through old newspapers, browsed archives, and reviewed old headlines. Eventually, he came across a dark column in an old newspaper about a strange legend associated with Edwards's camera. The article claimed that Edwards had developed a technique believed to trap souls in photographs, which was why his photos often displayed eerie shadows. This legend was not taken seriously at the time, but was considered a frightening reality by some. As Alex read this information, his skin crawled. Every moment he spent with the camera made him think it was not just an antique, but harbored a much darker secret. The disappearance of Edwards and the rumors surrounding him only amplified Alex's fear. However, he succumbed to his curiosity and decided to use the camera again. That night, Alex took the camera once more. This time, he chose to take photos not in his apartment, but in a more isolated part of the city, near an abandoned building. His aim was to test the camera in a setting closer to its original environment and to find out if the shadows appeared only in his apartment. Perhaps the shadows only manifested in specific locations. At midnight, Alex stood in front of the abandoned building amid the cold winds. The building's crumbling walls glistened eerily under the pale moonlight. The surroundings were silent, with only a faint hum in the distance. Alex, with trembling hands, adjusted the camera and began taking a few shots. With each click, the mechanical sound of the camera echoed through the night's silence. As Alex took the photos, he felt as though someone was watching him. This sensation soon gave way to a tangible fear. When he finished taking the shots, his heart raced. There was no one around, but it felt as if something was with him. He decided to leave immediately and return home. Upon arriving home, Alex went straight to the darkroom to develop the photos he had taken. He felt a shiver, as if he was about to encounter something that would never let him go. The first images emerging from the film bath revealed the eerie silhouette of the abandoned building. However, upon closer inspection, Alex's fear grew. In the photos, the silhouettes had become more pronounced in each shot taken in front of the building. The shadows appeared not just on walls or corners, but seemed almost as if they were standing next to him. The shadows advanced one by one, becoming clearer in each frame as if they were moving closer. When he held the last photo, he saw that the shadows were not just silhouettes anymore. In this final frame, Edwards's silhouette was clearly visible, staring directly at Alex with empty eyes. Alex's gaze was locked in terror on this horrifying image. The only thing he was now certain of was that this camera was not just an old piece of equipment. It was a curse carrying Edwards's dark spirit, and that curse was now following Alex. Alex now understood better how deep the terrifying effects of the camera and Edwards's curse were. Each use of the camera posed a more pronounced threat to his life. The traces of Edwards's ghost constantly disturbed him, following him like a shadow with every step he took. Finally, he decided to come up with a more concrete plan to stop this curse. Focusing on what the old man in the cafe had said, Alex continued researching people from Edwards's past. He sifted through old newspapers and archives to find a list of people who knew Edwards during the time he disappeared. Some of Edwards's friends had lived into the present day, while others had passed away. However, he gathered numbers from an old phone directory in hopes of contacting someone who was still alive. For a week, he tried the addresses and phone numbers of Edwards's old friends. Most numbers were either incorrect or invalid. Eventually, he learned that Edwards's former business partner was an elderly woman living in Brooklyn. Her name was Agnes Parker, and she had worked closely with Edwards, having the closest relationship with him. Alex decided to go to Brooklyn to reach Agnes Parker. The house where the woman lived was in a remote area of the city, in an almost abandoned neighborhood. The surroundings were dark and silent, with only the wind rustling through the trees. Alex knocked on the door, and an elderly voice answered, opening the door. Agnes was an old, tired woman with deep wrinkles that bore the marks of many years. Alex introduced himself and explained that he wanted to learn about Edwards. Though Agnes was initially somewhat cautious, she slowly invited Alex inside after seeing his sincerity. As Alex stepped inside, he felt transported to another era. The interior of the house was filled with relics of the past, historical furnishings, and old photographs. Agnes began recounting her memories of Edwards. She described how Edwards went through a dark period, became paranoid, and constantly felt threatened. In their last conversations, Edwards had mentioned something about dark eyes and his attempts to protect himself. Agnes said that Edwards had vanished one night without warning. That night, a series of mysterious events occurred. Strange sounds and shadows were seen in the house. On the day Edwards disappeared, police and investigative teams came to the house but found no trace of him. Everything had vanished suddenly and inexplicably. Agnes asked if Alex could find any object or memento related to Edwards's disappearance. Behind an old cupboard in the house, amidst many old photos and documents, Alex discovered a notebook written in Edwards's handwriting. The pages were filled with complex notes and strange symbols. Agnes handed the notebook to Alex, saying that these notes documented Edwards's paranoia and fears during his final days. When Alex carefully examined the notebook, he realized that Edwards had included information about some ancient, malevolent forces. Edwards believed that the dark eyes were not just a legend, but a real threat following him. The notebook detailed an old ritual. It was written that this ritual could be used to stop the curse or calm the spirits. Alex obtained information from Agnes about where this ritual could be performed. Agnes provided details about an old underground cemetery that Edwards frequently visited. This cemetery was located outside the city, deep in a forest, and was a place where Edwards thought his spirit could find peace. As night fell, Alex decided to follow the information in the notebook and head to the cemetery. As he stepped outside his house, shadows once again surrounded him. The curse of Edwards was with him not only at night, but at every moment. As he set out towards the cemetery, Alex felt both great fear and a glimmer of hope. This ritual might be his only chance to stop the dark eyes and free himself from this horrifying curse. Alex reached the cemetery in the late hours of the night. The walk through the dense forest was quite frightening, with shadows wrapping around him and the eerie silence of the night. The entrance to the cemetery appeared forgotten and abandoned over time. The iron gates were rusty and broken in places. Holding the notebook tightly, Alex stepped into the cemetery. He made his way through a narrow path among tall trees, heading deeper into the cemetery. He carefully examined the surroundings to find the old stone grave mentioned in the notebook. In the dark, he noticed old symbols and markings on the ancient grave that were barely visible among the stones. The grave bore old writings and symbols related to the ritual Edwards had practiced in his final days. Following the instructions in the notebook, Alex drew a circle around the grave and placed some special materials, red thread, salt, and an old stone, inside the circle. For the first step of the ritual, Alex began by drawing symbols on the old stone and reciting prayers from ancient Arabic texts. Lighting candles, he created a flickering light in the darkness. His trembling hands revealed his intense fear and anxiety. He wanted to be sure that every step of this dangerous ritual was executed correctly. However, in the midst of the ritual, Alex felt a strange chill. The wind suddenly picked up, rustling through the old trees and producing a frightening sound. Alex noticed shadows moving around him. It felt as if an ancient malevolence was emerging from the depths of the cemetery. The shadows danced around the grave, feeling like a dark entity. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the depths of the cemetery. Alex's heart raced, and his hands were sweating. Could the sounds belong to Edwards's ghost? Trying to regain his composure, he continued with the final steps of the ritual. He read some ancient formulas and spells from the notebook, aiming to complete the ritual. At the end of the ritual, he gathered the symbols and materials around the grave and carefully placed the stones back in their place. The dance of the shadows slowed down, and the chill in the air lessened as the night returned to silence. Alex took a deep breath, feeling relieved that the ritual was over. However, he did not see immediate effects from the ritual. He decided to wait in the cemetery for a few more minutes, but instead of finding deep peace, dark shadows began to encircle him again. Edwards's spirit felt even more intense. After a while, a figure appeared in the depths of the cemetery. It resembled an indistinct silhouette moving among the shadows. Alex noticed the figure slowly approaching him. His heart raced, and he stepped back in panic. The figure resembled the silhouette from Edwards's old photographs, but now it was even more frightening and unclear. The figure approached Alex silently, carrying a deep sense of anger and vengeance. Suddenly, the figure vanished, and the night fell silent again. Alex quickly left the cemetery after this experience. Before returning, he thought about how Edwards's spirit was still free and wondered if the ritual had been effective enough. Back at home, Alex sat next to the camera. The accumulated shadows and dark energy were becoming more pronounced each day. He was unsure if he had truly brought peace to Edwards's spirit. Nonetheless, he had to find a way to rid his life of this fear somehow. His eyes, weary and anxious, rested on the notebook. He wanted to ensure that the ritual had been performed correctly, but he still felt the dark eyes following him. He realized that Edwards's spirit had not fully departed from this world, and that the curse had not yet ended. Now, Alex needed to search for other ways to stop the dark eyes and end this curse. Alex spent the night reflecting and resting after returning from the cemetery. He had a deep sense that Edwards's spirit was still lingering around. Knowing that the dark eyes would not leave him in peace, he decided he needed to make one final move to completely end the curse. The next morning, Alex sought to gather more information about significant places in Edwards's life. Based on Agnes's notes and what he had learned at the cemetery, he decided to find Edwards's old house. This house was where Edwards had lived in his final days, and might be key to understanding if his spirit had found peace there. Alex set out to the house in an old neighborhood. The house's dilapidated appearance indicated it had been unused for a long time. The surrounding area was neglected, and some windows were broken. When he knocked on the door, it creaked open slightly, revealing a deep silence inside. Alex gathered his courage and stepped inside. The air inside the house bore traces of past sorrow and sadness. In the high-ceilinged rooms, there were old furniture and dust-covered belongings. Alex carefully examined each room, searching for any signs of Edwards's final days. In one corner of the house, he found an old study room with Edwards's journals, manuscripts, and some personal items. Among the belongings, he discovered a series of old photographs and notes. Some of Edwards's letters detailed his spiritual decline and fears. The photographs included a group of old friends and familiar faces. One photograph caught his attention. In it, Edwards was holding a camera, and in the background, an old stone grave was visible. This grave resembled the one with the symbols he had seen at the cemetery. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note by Edwards. "The final battle will be before this grave." After reading this note, Alex realized that Edwards's spirit was indeed around the grave, and that this place was critical for stopping the curse. He carefully put the photograph in his pocket and decided to return to the grave. He wanted to find the exact spot where the ritual needed to be performed and end the curse once and for all. In the evening, as he returned to the cemetery, darkness had fallen. Alex drew a circle around the old stone grave and started a new ritual, following the instructions in the notebook. This time, he worked with greater determination and focus. He carefully performed each step of the ritual and recited the special prayers. However, after a while, the shadows around the grave intensified, and dark eyes reappeared. Alex noticed the dark figures moving around and thought they might be parts of Edwards's spirit. In the final stage of the battle, he had to confront these dark figures. As the dark eyes surrounded him, Alex gathered his courage and made a final effort. As part of the ritual, he performed the last steps needed to ensure Edwards's spirit truly found peace. Suddenly, the shadows quivered, and the dark eyes began to recede. He felt the air change abruptly, with the cold and tension easing. As Alex collected the symbols and markings around the grave, he noticed that the shadows and dark figures had vanished. The cemetery had slowly returned to silence, and Alex felt a spiritual relief. He believed that Edwards's spirit had finally found peace. Returning home, Alex checked his camera and noticed that Edwards's traces had completely vanished. The influence of the dark eyes had diminished, and Alex's life seemed to return to normal. The camera now remained an ordinary object. Finally, Alex felt that this terrifying journey had come to an end. The curse of Edwards was over, and Alex enjoyed the peace of returning to his life. He had uncovered the secrets behind the shadows and overcome the darkness.